Hello, my name's Josh. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I've recently been through a divorce. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about cohabitation during divorce, why I decided to do that, and a little bit about the experience that I had with it. First, to be clear, cohabitation means that you still reside in the same home while the divorce process is going through. And there are some important reasons that someone may decide to do that. So in my case, I didn't want the divorce to begin with. So when my wife asked for the divorce, what is very common, obviously, and it's kind of a social norm, I guess, is that for whatever reason, if the wife asks for a divorce, or whoever asks for the divorce, it doesn't really matter. The man moves out of the home and leaves the children with his wife. Over the years, I had heard several advertisements for law firms that specialize in men's law in divorce. And I remember just during this time that several of those advertisements would say, if you're a man getting divorced, one of the things you need to never do is move out of the home. And so I decided right then and there, just because I had heard that, I was not moving out of the home. And in my case, I felt, and there was no good reason for the divorce, and why I did not want my children to feel that just because we were divorcing, that basically dad was out of their life. I wanted to be a very active participant in my children's life. I had been an active participant in my children's life, and I wanted them to know that I would be. And so I decided that I was not going to move out of the home. So eventually what happened, not too long afterwards, I ended up moving into a bedroom in the upstairs of our home, which was one of the children's bedroom, and we kind of rearranged bedrooms a bit, and I moved into that room. And I made it kind of like a second master in that we put a TV in there, just kind of made it my own space. That was, for the kids, it was kind of an adventure at first. It was a little odd for them, I could tell. And we had already talked to them, so they knew that the divorce was happening. But it was a good thing, and it created some problems. But first, the reason it was good was as I went through the divorce process, I started visiting with attorneys and I was interviewing attorneys. One of the common questions I would ask them is, should I move out or should I not move out, and why? One of the very common things I heard was absolutely not. You should not move out of the home. And the reason is because sometimes if a divorce is contentious and if something has already happened that's kind of working, and it gets to the stage of being before a judge, the judge may just keep things the way they are. So in other words, if I had moved out and agreed to, say, every other weekend of custody with my children, if that was kind of working for the kids, a judge could very easily say, well, if this is working out, I don't see why I would change it, regardless of how I personally felt about that matter. So I didn't want to set that precedent. I wanted to have an active, fulfilling relationship with my children, and I wanted that to be represented to my children and to a potential judge in the future. The other reason is kind of financial. It's going to be very difficult for us to pay for this home as well as an apartment or whatever other living arrangement was made. My ex-wife and I, neither of us have family that live nearby. So moving into a relative's home, for some cheap and affordable rent was just not even an option. Third of all was a bit of a personal issue, which was I just didn't see why I should move out of the home. I mean, if I'm not the one who wants this divorce, so why would I move out of my home? This really it wasn't my wife's home, it wasn't my home, it was our home. So I didn't see a reason that either one of us really had to move out unless one of us chose to move out. And I wasn't choosing to move out, but I was willing to accommodate some things and move into a different room to try to make things a little bit more livable. That did create a few problems. One of those problems had to do with the children. Now, mind you, all this was happening during COVID. So, so cohabitation was a bit of a difficult thing because we were all always home. Because they went into the homeschooling, for a period of time there. And so everyone was always home. And that was definitely a challenge. But eventually what we got to was a decision that we would split custody with our children on a 50-50 basis. And we came to an arrangement for that while we were cohabitating. And it was an arrangement that worked for us. And that made things a little bit easier in that we called it parent on duty, or POD was kind of our acronym for that. So our kids knew who the POD was every single day. They knew. And what they knew was that was the parent that if there was a doctor's appointment or some sort of appointment they had to go to, that was the parent that was going to be taking them. That parent would be responsible for meals that day. That parent would be responsible for really anything with the children on that day. They were the parent on duty. So that made things a little easier. It also made things difficult because sometimes when I wasn't the POD, I really didn't know what to do. So I kind of made it, it was hard because of COVID. So it's not like I could just go to the movies or I could go out and do stuff. But I would make sure that when I wasn't working, because I had to set up my office in my home to work through COVID, that to make it a little easier on my spouse, I tried to make myself a little more scarce. So I did have some people that I could go over to their home. And so I'd go hang out with them a little bit. Or that's when I would go on some really long walks or nature hikes. Or I would just go in my room and I would just shut my door and kind of work on stuff, whether it was a project, something I was interested in, watch TV, whatever the case was. I didn't want my ex to feel like I was stepping on her toes while she was the POD. And then when I was POD, it was the opposite. And so that was helpful. That was a helpful thing during the cohabitation process. One of the things I worked very hard on, and I actually got some pretty strong inspiration on this during General Conference, was to do what I could to have our home be a happy place. That was difficult because communication during that time between my wife and I, for a bunch of reasons, broke down to where basically we were only texting with each other. There was no actual conversation. The kids pick up on that right away. And so trying to, even though there was a lack of communication, verbal communication between my then spouse and I, let them know that even though this divorce was happening, everything was okay. That I had to make sure I didn't speak ill of my wife to the children. And actually that I was very positive about things with them. Like, oh yeah, your mom's going to take you that when she's POD on this day, or whatever the case may be. So that they didn't feel like there was any friction, although they could see it. But that was also one of the negative things, is they kind of, although they knew who the POD was, they at first didn't know if they can kind of talk about this about mom with me or not. And I made it very clear to them, oh yeah, don't worry about that at all. It's not a problem. So making the kids understand that it was okay to talk to me, and I would encourage them to talk to their mom during this time as well. That was one of the challenges in making it feel like a comfortable place for the children. Now, one of the difficult parts of cohabitation is it can be difficult to see the person you're divorcing on a pretty regular basis. But that's where I kind of got to the point of, you know what, we have to be adults here. We have to put the kids' needs first and do what is best for them. And I needed to suck it up. That's all there was to it. I needed to be an adult, and that's what I was going to do. So that was a little bit difficult. It got to a point, though, where we were working through the divorce process, the lawyers were involved, and then it started getting a little bit too contentious. So we ended up having an emergency mediation session, which was really good. In that emergency mediation session, we decided who was going to stay in the house, who was going to leave, what the custody arrangement was going to look like, how money and debt and all that stuff was going to be split up on a temporary basis until we would have final mediation a few months down the line. That emergency mediation was actually really helpful because it alleviated for me my concerns about, potentially some judge thinking that, if we separated, that one parent was trying to ostracize the other. At that point, that wasn't a thing. It was part of a mediation agreement that was agreed to by attorneys and a mediator. So it wouldn't be frowned upon if one parent moved out or how the finances were split or anything like that. It was agreed to within a legal framework. And that was really good. So I think my recommendation, if I was to go back and do it all over again, I would definitely cohabitate, but then I would try to get that first initial, again, we called it an emergency mediation session, put into place as quickly as possible so that all those preliminary arrangements could be made in a good, meaningful framework that neither parent is really hurt by it. And that made things, I think, a little bit more, at least it felt within a legal framework, a little bit more agreeable to me. Now, that said, it still took a lot of patience with the other spouse, and I'm sure my ex would say the same in return. It took a lot of figuring things out. But on the other hand, I'm glad I was in the home. There was many nights when I had children come to my bedroom in the middle of the night with questions or they were very upset, and I felt glad that I was able to be in the home as one of the options for my kids to come and talk to and seek comfort from. And although as sad as some of those moments were and as difficult as those moments were, I'm glad I was able to be there for them, because as a parent, that's what you want to be. You want to be the person that's able to help guide them through that. So I guess if someone were to ask me, should I cohabitate? If we're getting divorced, we're the early stages, how should we handle it? I would say the answer is, if you can be adults, then yes, cohabitate. If you can be civil with one another, then yes, cohabitate. Especially in the men's case, unfortunately, kind of the unfortunate reality is a lot of the family court system in this country is built not favorably towards men. Now, that's not always true. I live in a state where it's actually pretty equitable, and so which is really good. But I just know from hearing some of my other friends and their experiences that the family court system isn't always friendly towards men. So I would definitely recommend cohabitation and try to set up that first mediation session so you can get everything arranged. And that's just my personal advice. So I'll end this with this. I'm not a lawyer, so before you do anything, you should get a lawyer. If you're going through the divorce process, get a lawyer and ask your attorney before you do anything, what the best thing for you to do is to protect your legal rights as a parent and as a person who has property or whatever else. So get a lawyer, get their advice. Second would be, I would consider talking to your bishop or your elders quorum president or your Relief Society president, not in an attempt to belittle your spouse, just so they understand what's going on, and maybe there's some help that they can give. They may not. Now, bishops aren't marital counselors, nothing of that sort, but maybe there is a word of advice. Maybe they give a blessing and that'd be helpful. And then third, if you're in counseling, definitely discuss it with your counselor, especially if it's someone maybe you've gone to marital counseling with, so maybe they know the both of you. Have a discussion with them. Oftentimes they've dealt with a lot of people, and so they've seen some things that work and don't work, and oftentimes they'll have good tips on how to make it work. And especially if they know your situation a little bit better, they may have some really good and helpful tips. So I would definitely talk to a counselor about it as well. In the end, you're going to want as much advice as is best. I think cohabitation can work. I think it is worth it. And I would strongly consider talking to the right people about it. If you're considering a divorce or you're in the divorce and you haven't moved out yet, have some of those good conversations and figure out what is best for you. Finally, whether you decide to cohabitate or not, pray. Pray and ask the Lord to help you have patience, to help heal you while you're hurting, and to help you make wise decisions. Decisions that are in the best interest of you, your soon-to-be former spouse, as well, and more importantly, probably your children. So again, my name's Josh. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This channel is not endorsed by the church. My thoughts are my own. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a counselor. I'm just someone who's been through it and who's learned a few lessons, and I'm hopefully can help some of you along the way. Thanks.